Well, hello there. Today we're talking about patterns and linear functions. So the key for today is to identify and represent patterns that describe linear functions. So linear is just a line. So a function that is a line. A few key terms we have is dependent variable, means it changes in response to another variable, and that would be the independent variable that is not affected by anything else. Inputs are your independent variables, outputs are your dependent variables. And typically you will see that your inputs or your independent variable would be your x, and your dependent or outputs would be your y. A lot of times when we're talking about linear function, it would look like something like this. That is one example of a linear function, where you have the x is your input and the y is your output. So depending on what x is will give you y. So I have this question in the diagram below. What is the relationship between the number of rectangles and the perimeter of the figure? And I want to represent this using table, words, equation, and graph. Make sure you write this down in your notebook. When I'm looking at your notes, I will make sure that you write this down. Make a table, look for a pattern to write an equation, and use the table to make a graph. So first I would make the table. So every time I have number of rectangles, that would be my x. I figure out my perimeter and then I write it as an ordered pair. My x goes first and then my y. So with one rectangle, I have 1 times 2 plus 2 times 6. And that is because the rectangle's length does not change, only the width does every time you add a rectangle. So this is what my table would look like. Here I have 4 points. Next, you want to be able to look for a pattern. So first, when I'm looking at this, in words I might say, okay, as my x increases, or my rectangle, that's my x variable, then I'm looking at what does my y do. So it looks like I added 2 here, I added 2 here. It looks like it's going up by 2. So if I'm going to write this as an equation, my constant would be the 12. How did I get 12? Well, you want to make sure that your points work. So the 2 comes from what I'm increasing by. So every x is increasing by 2. So that's why I'm multiplying that by my x. Now if I want to make sure that this equation works for my table, if I were to plug in 1, what would I have to add to that number to get 14? So if I just had y is equal to 2 times 1, that would be equal to 2. Well, that's not what my ordered pair is. My ordered pair is 1 to 14. So I have to make sure to add 12 to it so that I can get my 14. A lot of this is just trial and error. And then lastly, I want to use my points to actually draw a graph. So I would just plot my points. So this would be my x. This is number of rectangles. And up here, this is my perimeter. You should always, 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 always label your x and y. And that would be my graph. Now I want you to try all the steps by yourself. So first, I want you to draw a table or make a table. Then I want you to put the pattern in words and write an equation. And then graph out your table. Oops, that should be a 3. So if I look at your table compared to mine, your table should have had the order pair of 1, 10, 2, 14, 3, 18, and 4, 22. In words, I wrote, as the number of triangles increase, my perimeter goes up by 4. So my equation would be this. Now again, how do I get that number? Well, this is what the y goes up by. How do I get the 6? Now you can figure it out using your head, or else if I look at all of my 4 equations here, the thing that does not change, that is constant in every single one, is this 3 times 2. That would be like my 6. 3 times 2 is 6. It will never change. That's going to be in every single problem. So when I'm doing my graph, now obviously it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you're going to be counted by something else besides 1, you should make sure to label. I counted by 5s for my y's, and I have my x as number of triangles and my y is my perimeter. And when you're graphing these are a linear function. How do I know it's linear? Is because it's going up by the same number each time. So this should be able to draw a line through your points. That represents a linear function. So here are tables already made for you. First you have to decide, is this a linear function? How do you tell? Well, you first want to see what am I going up each time with the x's. So this was a +1, +1, +1. So now I want to see what am I going up or down by for my y's. This was a -3, -3, -3. As long as the pattern for all the x's and y's are the same, then it would be a linear function. So yes, it's going to be linear. Then it says, using your words, describe what's happening here. So I would say, as the number of photos are taken, then the memory, or the megabytes, is decreasing by 3 each time. So I'm going to write my equation. Y is going to be equal to, the first number should be what your y changes. So my y changes by -3 each time. And then I have to think, what's my constant? What is always there? Well, another way to think of your constant is if x were 0, what would y be? So whenever you have the point 0, that's already going to give you your constant. So you can always test this out. If I plugged 1 into my equation, I would get -3 times 1 plus 512, which would be equal to 509. So it checks out. And then you also have to graph the picture. Now since I start at 500, I'm going to put a little break in my graph. That means right there, this symbol means that I'm not starting at 0. I'm going to be starting at 500, and then I'm going to go to 505, 510, 515, and 520. I don't really need the 520, but I'm still going to have the 1, 2, 3, and 4. My x's would be number of photos, and my y is going to be my memory. So I'm going to graph each of these. At 0, it was at 512. So I go 512 is about right here. Plot that point at 1, it's at 509. At 2, it's 506. At 3, it's 503. Again, it should be roughly a straight line. That is all I got for you today. Make sure you fill out the Google form, you submit it, and you took notes. When I'm looking at your notes, I'm looking for the 2 examples plus this one that already had the table in your notebook. Otherwise, no points.